Good morning, everyone. My name's Gavin Starks. I'm the founder of Icebreaker1, and I want to walk through today a little bit about what we've been doing on the Open Energy initiative, including a background on the MEDA 3 program, which we ran from February to July this year. Just to recap, Open Energy comprises three elements. There's two market-facing services. One is Energy Search, which is a search engine for energy data across the whole of the market. So helping to link together all the different initiatives that are out there, of which there are many, and we very much want to hear if you're running a data initiative, please let us know what that is. Second market-facing component here is access control. So that's about how can we really enable access to commercial data. So when there's permission required or a closed ecosystem that needs restricted access. And to inform all of that, we have what we're calling a forum here, which is taking input from industry through advisory groups and steering groups and a review group into what could be potential codes of practice for the market here to help everybody better share, find, access, and use data. There are a few calls to action here. I'll come to these again at the end, but one is participation, absolutely critical here. We're spinning up some new advisory groups around membership and delivery and user needs. There's a steering group as well, which is going to include parts of government, BEIS, Innovate UK, and Ofgem. And then there's open review tracks. All of this is documented on energy.icebreaker1.org. The second call to action is around publishing metadata so that we can add whatever initiatives and projects you've got into the search function, if you like, the shop window for the market here, and register into the trust framework. But we'll go through that in more detail as we go through. MEDA ran from February to July. What we're now in the process of planning this month is a pilot phase. We've got a roadmap here to take us through to March next year, which is very much about, again, understanding what the market is doing, what the needs are, what existing initiatives exist, how we can link them all together and onboard people into the solutions that we've been developing here. Just in terms of our relationship with government, Open Energy here is a service that makes it easier to search, access, and securely share energy data. And both Ofgem and the UK government are supportive of this project. So this is a quote from those participants. And this is all about a call to action for collaboration around open standards. Everything that we develop is openly licensed by default, and we're an independent nonprofit. So our agenda here is really to help people join together lots of existing work and find out what the additionality, what the additional pieces that we can bring to the market solutions here. What I want to do now is just give you a rerun of the output of the MEDA 3 program. So I'm going to play that through here now so that you can see exactly what was presented back as the outputs of that program. What we're going to do today is run through a quick summary of what we've achieved. We're then going to demo what we've built, then go through the research policy, licensing and governance components, through the beta testing program summary, and the business model and next steps. I'm going to kick us off just by summarizing. This is a slide from our MEDA 3 proposal, which we presented in December. And I'm pleased to say we've delivered all of the things that we set out to do here in terms of a private beta, public beta, membership model, the foundations of what could become a standard, and the conditions for a thriving ecosystem. And you'll see as we go through this, the level of engagement that we've had. We set out success parameters here to say that really an operational open marketplace is the objective for this long term. At the heart of this is what we call cohesion and interoperability, and that's really fundamental to the design principles here. We should not be in a position in the 21st century where people are arguing over 1,000 different ways of integrating. We've got to reduce the friction and costs of data sharing radically. And while there are lots of technology components, it's not really a technology problem. It's a business problem, cultural problem, and a technical problem. Throughout the program, we've collaborated with over 70 representatives from across industry and government, and over 20 beta testers. And we've designed, built, and tested the solutions. These deliver energy search, access control, and a development forum, which we'll unpack as we go through this. We've addressed the business and technical interoperability components. And just as a reminder as well, Open Energy is a non-profit initiative. We're trying to be a neutral party in the development of this ecosystem to enable everybody to come together. We think we're aligned with the national strategy around data and the Energy Digitalisation Task Force. We've tried to summarise the entire project in one slide. So Open Energy here boils down to energy search and access control. So those are the service components that enable discovery and access. And then underpinning that, there's work on understanding user needs, market needs, roadmap for development, standards development across policy, technology, data, and operations, and those come together into the development and implementation of services. But those have all been focused through advisory groups and steering groups. The first part of that is search. That's now live at openenergy.org.uk. So you can start to search for data, and we've been working with the EEBP program as well to work on the data standards to make it easy for data to be indexed and therefore made discoverable into the actual energy data service. The search results here, we've been through a lot of iterations around. After you've got your results, you can start to drill into more detailed filtering based on format, based on usage license and categories, as well as how fresh the data is, when it was last updated, and who the data owners are. I'm going to pass over now to Tom to take us through a demo and more detail about the underlying technical architecture here. This gets quite technical quite quickly, just for to pre-warn everybody. But a lot of the work here isn't very visible. It's the plumbing, and that's the kind of message to take away. There's a lot of plumbing work, which is mostly invisible, and rightly so. But Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Gavin. Yes, I'm Tom Owen. I'm Information Architect for Open Energy. And just going to talk quickly about the components we've built. As Gavin said, this is primarily not a technical challenge, but there are technical elements. So we have two primary concerns. We initially have search, and this is about making data accessible and discoverable. We've done this. We've defined a metadata file format, which allows data providers to describe their information. We have then a custom component, which will go and fetch that information from each data provider in turn, and we'll push it into our Open Energy search system, which is based on CCAN, which is a very stable and mature product. We have customized it and deployed it. The second concern, and really where most of this diagram is kicking in, is access control. This is the technical infrastructure that allows participants to mutually authenticate, to trust each other, and to know that when a request is received by a data provider from a data consumer, the yellow and blue boxes respectively on this image, that the entity making the request is part of the Open Energy ecosystem. They can be identified, and sufficient information is made with trusted provenance that the data provider can make an access determination for any given piece of data. And we'll talk more about that in our licensing and access control section later. To do this, we're using the financial grade API, which is developed as part of open banking. However, there are some issues with this. So this is the set of specifications in the financial grade API. It is complex. Now, we wish to avoid unnecessary complexity, but unfortunately in this case, the complexity is necessary because it underpins the security infrastructure. We have mitigated that in a number of different ways. We have taken a specific subset of the financial grade API. So while you would need to read all of these specifications, you wouldn't necessarily need to edit all of them. However, that's still unnecessarily complex. So we have instead, as well as this, we have defined a reference subset, we have reference implementations and extensive documentation. So we don't require participants to actually go and read the raw specification. We provide the information for them. If they're using certain technologies, we've provided libraries and code that they can use directly. And I would like to show you that working. The diagram on the right is the authorization flow. So the initial stage is that a data consumer would wish to search for information. Now this shows the search results from a given data provider, in this case Passive UK, one of our partners. And let's suppose we wish to access these Bridgend LAEP pathway data, and the detail for this will be here. Part of the metadata file is a description of how to access the resource, and that's done as part of Open API. Now, this isn't particularly user-friendly, but it does give us the server and the path to go to. Now, if we were just to try to access that, what we get is an error, because this is secure. This is not intended to be accessed through a browser. It requires significant degrees of authorization. One of our beta participants asked us if we could enable this from Google Colab. And Google Colab is an online data science platform. It's nice because it allows us to share information or share experiment details effectively. So if I were to go to this one, this is a bit of Python code. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but if I upload some key material, and this is cryptographic material that's generated by our directory, the authorization system that tracks Open Energy members, if we then run some code here to install this. So this is all running in a web browser. This is a free plan, in fact, from Google Colab. So this is the minimum technical entry barrier for any form of data consumer. We run this command to set up our libraries. We do this. We have already got our keys. Not going to talk about this particularly. And we can now access some data. So this is going from this URL, which previously failed because it's authorized. And it's pulled in data from the data provider, it's pulled it in securely, it's handled authentication and authorization, it's protected the data in flight, it's done all of these good things, and it's pulled it into an environment where a data scientist can now work with this information and hopefully solve some useful question with it. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Kevin.
Thank you, Tom. Now you should be able to see my slides again. If not, please let me know. I'm now going to pass over to Emily to walk us through the research and policy piece. But I think what Tom has illustrated there is, one, we've not only built the underlying security framework there and the authentication framework to enable access control, but it's actually using modern tools, quite straightforward for people to build things. And we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go forward as well. Emily.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, so I'll be walking through some of our research and policy development, but just a quick note to begin with about our approach. So Gavin's mentioned this already in the beginning, but all of our research work has worked around two core principles. The first is working in the open, and this basically means that we get as much of our work out to consultation through a variety of tracks that you can see on the slide kind of as soon as possible. So we're not designing at the whiteboard, we're kind of engaging with the sector as soon as possible. And the second is that we work by the sector and for the sector, and essentially, you know, this builds on working in the open to mean that we work transparently, we respond to all pieces of feedback, and we seek feedback from as wide a range of people as possible. So in the spirit of that, we've run 5 consultations over the last 5 months. The blog link below shows you complete sort of transparent responses to 3 of the core data governance policies I will present to you in a second. So yeah, we've kind of run through 3 phases of data governance policy development, the first of which is designing a system of data sensitivity classes. To say from the outset, this is designed to supplement, not replace, the Ofgem data best practice guidance. And in particular, we are responding to feedback that the industry would like more nuance in terms of how to classify shared data. We are also responding to industry feedback that they will share a huge variety, or would like to share a huge variety of data types within the open energy ecosystem. So we need to kind of have a way of categorizing these to make sure that they're protected appropriately. So with this in mind, we've developed a system of 5 data sensitivity classes, of which 3 of these, OESA, OESB, and OESP, are types of shared data. For the purposes of phase 3, we've been focusing on governance of the 3 classes that you can see outlined in orange. And we've put a lot of work, particularly into access control for classes OESA and OESB, that are types of shared data that don't include personal data. So if I can move on a slide, please, to access controls. Yeah, so this is the second area of core policy development that we've been doing recently. And this will take a little bit more time to explain. You know, feel free to ask any questions as well. Essentially, it's based around a system of rules. So data providers must create a rule or several rules for each data set that they share via the open energy ecosystem. And a rule is an articulation of the data set sensitivity class that you've just seen, a range of access conditions, and its license. And I'll talk about licensing on the next slide. So access rules can draw on a few things. They can draw on properties of the data consumer that's known to Open Energy. So for example, the verified identity of a particular data consumer. And they can also draw on information that is known to the data provider alone, constituting information that it wouldn't be appropriate to share via the Open Energy ecosystem for things like commercial sensitivity reasons, like payment relationships or bilateral commercial relationships. Access rules can either be defined as definitive or indicative as well. Definitive rules essentially mean that any data consumer that fulfills all of the rules will automatically gain access to the data set. So that could potentially lead to a degree of automation and kind of human out the loop processes in future. Indicative rules mean that the data provider will provide some final checks or may need to check some information internally before providing access. Of course, for indicative rules, there have been questions about, what would happen if these are not fulfilled. And in that case, we will be articulating a dispute resolution process that will be developed in phase 4. The other things to mention are that access rules will have a defined date range to respond to concerns raised in the sector about, conditions changing too quickly. So data consumers will have a degree of certainty. And also all access rules will be published completely transparently in the metadata file. And the table on the right just shows a range of access condition types on which these rules can be based. So as mentioned before, the final kind of big policy consultation was on our licensing model. And in a nutshell, licensing is expressed as a grant of a set of capabilities and associated obligations scoped to the results of a single API call from a data consumer to a shared data API within a data provider. And the diagram below provides a bit more detail about kind of the information flow within that process. So to go through a couple of things, a bit of terminology, capabilities are essentially a clear expression of what the data consumer can do with the results of the call. So for example, language currently used in licensing might allow things like use internally or redistribution. Obligations are then things that a data consumer must do while exercising a capability, such as citing or crediting the original author of the resource. Why this model might be another question that you ask. And essentially, the reason we've landed on this is because our research has shown that a degree of license pluralism is necessary and valuable within this ecosystem, but it must occur within standardized and transparent parameters. So we hope this meets kind of all requirements that have been raised by data providers in terms of, at the moment, if they take a single licensing approach, they come up with a very, very long and complex document that attempts to govern all possible scenarios of data use within a single document that becomes very hard to read and can lead to quite a bit of misconception. So instead, this licensing model allows multiple pathways that can be expressed in legal, machine readable and human readable forms as simply as possible. So the license kind of contains the minimum number of simple clauses per access rule. So we hope that it will become much more transparent through the use of this system. So if I could just flip to my final slide, please, I'll just quickly go through a bit of documentation that we've also produced alongside policy development. And this incorporates membership, operational, technical, and operational guidelines. So again, as with our whole research approach, we've taken an extremely kind of collaborative and engagement heavy approach, and we hope that this will set the groundwork for the establishment of codes of practice in future, possibly voluntary or possibly regulated standards, depending on where development pathways lead as we go forwards. The link that you'll see below is to the operational guidelines with a couple of screenshots on the right hand side. This is one huge piece of documentation, but we hope one that's organised quite clearly, that includes 10 sections basically outlining everything that new members or existing members will need to know in order to operate successfully in the ecosystem. Alongside this, and there are links in the final report to this as well, are a range of membership, beta testing, infrastructural support and technical documentation files that will hopefully help all members have a smooth journey through taking part. That's all from me. I'll hand back to you, Gavin.
Thank you, Emily. So what Emily's highlighted there is we've really tried to wrestle one of the hardest parts of this to the ground in terms of licensing. And when we talk about interoperability, the legal interoperability is one of the critical components here that must be addressed. What we feel here is through the development and the collaborative process we've had with advisory groups and the steering group, is lay the foundations for what could become codes of practice, leading to either voluntary standards or regulated standards in the ecosystem. I'm now going to pass over to Frank to talk us through our approach to delivery and beta testing.
Thank you, Gavin. The way we approached delivery on this project was in a, if you like, a fairly standard agile delivery way. So we, after a month of planning during February, we settled on having 2-week iterations running from March through to the end of July. And we had a regular backlog review at the end of each iteration to make sure that what we were focused on for the next iteration was the things that were most relevant. We had regular engagement with other Icebreaker 1 teams and, of course, the advisory groups. And we structured the advisory groups meetings and our delivery sprints in such a way that we could generate questions, feed them out to the advisory group, and then consume their recommendations or advice back into our planning, schedule, and delivery. We also had regular retrospectives to consider and revise our delivery processes. Now, the thing about Agile is that it's not just a machinery or a framework. It's based on certain principles, and one of the principles are that you have regular user engagement from real users to focus on their needs. And so we used beta testing throughout the latter half of phase 3 as a way to achieve that. So the testers involved, if you get them involved as early as possible rather than late in the development, it means that they can have maximum impact on the development of what you're working on, and it can increase buy-in from early adopters. But it also means that those beta testers need to be comfortable with things that aren't quite finished or aren't quite polished because they're being exposed to very early basic functionality. So to support the testers, we created open source exemplar implementations for both a data provider and a data consumer. And we also stood up a fully working example data provider with some example data sets so that those who were data consumers who made up the larger selection of beta testers had some endpoints and some real data they could interact with to prove that what they had built at their end functioned correctly. And we also created step-by-step instructions for deploying a data provider as a standalone instance in Amazon AWS for those who wanted to explore being data providers without having to figure out how to do that within their own technical infrastructure. So just why we were doing beta testing, it goes beyond basic technical checks because of course, we want to make sure that the parts work and they work together as expected, but also we want to make sure that there might be policies or procedures that are related to the functionality that we're working on that we need to call out and get advice from non-technical teams. So having people use it clarifies such things. It also helps us figure out whether or not the functionality we're in the process of delivering meets the needs of the users. It's not enough to just deliver software or throw it out there. If the users themselves don't pick it up and use it and see the benefit of it, then at least to me, it hasn't delivered anything. So again, having their involvement is very important. And most importantly, it shows that the things that we're building make sense to the users, which goes beyond technical functionality and reaches into things such as documentation, communications, messages, and so forth. So we had 2 rounds of beta testing. One was in June, and we had 8 organizations who were engaged in that with 7 relatively simple test scenarios. And then from what we learned from that, we went into round 2, and we had 19 beta test organizations involved in that, and a more detailed set of test scenarios. The variety of organizations we had included startups, MEDA applicants, some organizations that might act as service providers within the ecosystem, as well as DNOs, National Grid, and I think an academic institution as well. And the specific test scenarios that we identified, which I'll show you quite briefly on the next slide, were there to make sure that everyone was focused on the same kinds of problems so that we could have consistent and comparable feedback from different beta testers as they encountered the same scenarios. And to support them, we had daily drop-in sessions on Google Meet. And we encouraged beta testers to share their screens with us so we could actually watch what they were doing, because we learned a lot from the details of how the problems they were facing and the tools they were using. We had regular engagement on 2 Slack channels, which allowed them not just to talk to us, but also to talk to each other. And we had regular email check-ins to check on progress and to encourage involvement. So this is an approximate flowchart of the different test scenarios. The blue ones are for general setup that everyone has to do. The green ones are for data consumers. The orange ones are for data providers. And then the yellow one at the end is for everyone as well to discover data. And some of the scenarios are equivalent, but are implemented in slightly different ways. This shows for all the different scenarios, every single scenario except one, at least some beta testers successfully completed and gave us good feedback for. The one that wasn't completed was the one that was hardest for anyone to do, which is stand up a data provider within their own infrastructure using technology other than what we have provided within our example documentation. And in fact, the testers were not only very engaged, but one of them has created an equivalent of some of the exemplar code we provided, but in the .NET environment for use in Microsoft environments, which is great because they're planning to open source that, and that will provide a way for those who work in Microsoft environments to also connect to Open Energy, something that we don't have a lot of experience in internally. And so the highlights from the findings, although we do have quite a lot of feedback and information, are that we got a lot of insights by watching people and talking to them and listening to them that we couldn't have got by talking to ourselves. And this is one of the reasons why you get beta testers involved early, rather than waiting to create a finished product and then presenting it to them and seeing what they think. It gave clarity on the variety of backgrounds and environments that Open Energy has to support, within organizations, and also the development experience and knowledge that people have, because we saw some, to us, surprising interpretations of tools and documentation that we created that we thought were clear, but it turns out there were completely legitimate alternative interpretations of those that surprised us. But it also indicated some of a need for simple onboarding, simple administrative processes, which will carry forward into what we're building for the future to support organizations and help them get onboarded. And it's also made it clear that the training and consulting will have a role in bringing larger organizations on board because of the diversity of teams within those organizations, such as security, network infrastructure, policy, and legal, all of whom have to play a part, but all of whom see a different part of the story. And so having some way of creating messaging and tools and information for those specific roles within organizations is going to be an important part of us making it easier for larger organizations to get on board. Back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Frank. So Frank's highlighted there a very intensive process of engaging with end users and learning the things that you always learn with end users is their interpretation of what you're presenting them is often different from what you wanted it to be, and quite legitimately so. And so that's helped us iterate and develop the service to meet the user needs. I'm going to hand over now to Miles, who's going to walk through the business model and our industry engagement. And just to tee that up, we started the process here anchored around a core use case. So over to you, Miles.
Good morning. Thank you, Gavin. So how did we do on delivering to our local authority use case? Well, we successfully demonstrated all the functionality, but time was against us for a full delivery. Let me unpick that. So we made sure that data is searchable and accessible, and we saw that data providers, including a passive WPD partnership, along with National Grid, and some like who are pure data providers, and some like SSE and Electrolink, who went further to show the potential for both data and service provision. So that was good. And we've seen great engagement from a range of service providers who've shown us that they can access the data and confirm that they can create the types of services that we're expecting. And we've had really excellent feedback from our two local authority reference customers, who are Plymouth and Bridgend, who've confirmed their desire to consume these services. So all in all, although we didn't do the full delivery, we're really positive and we've got a high level of confidence about this going forward. So all the way through this, we've been thinking about how we can deliver benefit to the market. And let's just unpick that and see what it means for different players. So for data providers, it means a much larger addressable market for their commercial data. It means for them easier, faster, cheaper regulatory compliance and easier data provision to energy sector data consumers and service providers, as well as to their industrial customers who will need to report on energy usage and carbon emissions. For data consumers, it's about finding and accessing the right data faster. So that's great for internal analysis, insight and reporting. It means that they can use that to get efficiency gains and develop new energy and industrial products and services through that insight. And also it means that they can better support their corporate sustainability reporting and things like TCFD. And then for service providers, which are actually a subset of data consumers, it means that they can address a wide range of energy use cases. It means that they will have interoperability and they'll be able to take advantage of cross-sector smart data opportunities. And they'll also have the potential to provide commercial data via APIs, which is also true of data providers. So lots of benefits that we've found as we've gone through this. So we've been thinking and listening to our stakeholders and advisory groups and identified really 3 key issues that we have to address as the sector embraces digitalisation. So firstly, meeting new and growing data sharing regulations. It's a really fast developing area and the technology is evolving rapidly and enabling some really exciting new opportunities, but we really got to be careful about all of that. So it's very useful to these guys. So secondly, keeping on top of it all without breaking the bank. The cost of manual processing data access requests is high, and doing it through current manual processes simply won't scale. Automation is absolutely essential. And we know from past experience of this kind of thing that investing now is far cheaper than trying to play catch up later. And thirdly, for companies that are looking to the future, thinking about the opportunities ahead and their digitalization strategy, the drive to net zero and creation of new value-added services, we think there's an enormous amount of opportunity here. And we think that all of that is a really exciting prospect, both for the sector and for UK PLC. So what does it mean in practice? We've tried to create a more sort of visual way of explaining this. Just thinking about the volume of data sharing that we'll encounter and the critical need for scalability, you can see from this visual tangle of connections that a go-it-alone approach with siloed data and many competing standards would just not be practical. So we need to make sure that we really fix that complexity, otherwise we'll hold back the sector. And the true cost of that overall and to the economy would be absolutely huge. So moving on to the next slide, here's our much simpler model. It's for the sector, it's by the sector, and as you've heard from Gavin, we're neutral and not for profit. And with wide-reaching consultation and discussion, we've agreed a membership-based approach, and to go with that, an interim membership fee structure, which is really important financially to give us the runway to move to a long-term business model. So we'll do this once, and then it'll become much easier to scale. All of this will enable the energy tech ecosystem to really develop much more quickly. And the easier it is to integrate, to become interoperable with other sectors, the faster we're going to transition to a decentralized, digitalized, decarbonized energy sector. And that's going to bring us some fantastic economic, environmental and social benefits along the way. What will this look like? Well, as we move forward, we're going to be looking at the next use cases that we're going to support, those which we can best serve and which are going to have the highest impact. So in the next phase of our development, we'll be going out to our members and stakeholders to identify and propose the next use cases. We actually already know quite a bit about some of these really exciting use cases and the capabilities that we'll need to support them. But what we'll do is we'll comprehensively evaluate them. We'll progress those which have the most promise. We'll take those through our advisory group, and then we'll sign off through steering. So there is a comprehensive evaluation and governance process around all of this. And back to you, Gavin.
Thank you, Miles. So as Miles has highlighted, this has very much been in consultation with the sector. And just to summarise again here, the service components here are energy search and access control. And these are the things that we feel that a standardised approach will unlock innovation across the marketplace. At no point do we want to store any of the raw data itself. It's really about connecting the ecosystem and providing the minimum viable plumbing, if you like, for that system. As important to the actual service delivery is the forum going forward. The advisory group process and the steering group process is critical to make sure that standards are adopted. There's lots of instances where standards are developed, but the adoption is low. What we've found, and I've been very pleasantly surprised by, is the level of engagement from organisations like SSE and National Grid to engage and lean into this process and help us understand what their real needs are. And that's going to be a continuous process that's going to run for some time. What we've done here is just quickly map out some of the related initiatives which this work is already supporting in some cases and can support going forward. And that ranges from the Base Smart Data Strategy. Obviously, we're engaged with the EDBP programme, and we're engaged with things like the National Digital Twin Strategy as well. And I think here, just to summarise what we think needs to happen next, Open Energy, from our perspective, is the operational implementation that unlocks data sharing across the markets. But there are questions here about the role of policy, about the role of the regulator to compel firms to participate and to mandate conformance and certification with standards. I think here we can move forwards with a industry-led approach without regulation, but it will be slower and more, if you like, of a sales process. We will get some of the people who are leaning in, who see this as the future, and others who will be slower to the uptake. And that's partly data maturity within organizations, as well as just business priorities. I think the real opportunity here is to bring this into some form of regulatory framework and help bridge into what should be regulated and what can be industry-led. Thank you very much.
So as we go forward here, as you've heard in the outline there, we had a very comprehensive engagement process through the beta program, and we'll publish some more details on that on the website shortly. Over the next 6 months, we're really looking to work on 5 areas of value. One is to help shape and unlock an open market for data sharing. And it's really critical here. We need to know what is out there. So please bring us your existing solutions. There's lots of development work going on out there across the market for data publishing and data sharing. And as part of that, we want to understand the direct needs through the advisory groups and steering groups and review groups. As we've just highlighted in the summary there, delivering authenticated data publishing and being effectively the shop window for data, whether it's open data or commercial data, both of those are supported through the search function, and then unlocking that commercial data sharing and usage. One of the bits of feedback we've had more recently since the end of the MEDA program, it has been that what we're doing here can support existing data strategies within organizations. So some organizations have fed back to us, they can actually accelerate their own strategies for data sharing, because a lot of the principles and practice here that we're developing are applicable internally within an organization as well as between organizations. And as part of this, just finally helping to input into part of our national strategy for modernizing energy data access and net zero, is we're really looking to how will all of this interface with things like transport as we electrify that going forward. So areas of collaborative development, I can't stress this enough. We really want as many people signing up here to engage as possible. Obviously, there's more effort involved in things like advisory groups. So we're creating a review group so that people can dip in to specific things they'd like to contribute to. And as part of this, we're trying to develop tools, code, documentation to help with this onboarding process and get the business cases clear. So one of the questions, which will be for the groups to take forward here, is the advisory groups. We had in the MEDA phase 3, we had an advisory group around membership. And one of the questions there is, obviously long term, this needs to be self-sustaining. So the question there is, what's free and what should be unlocked through paid membership? And on this slide, we've got an overview of some current thoughts based on the feedback from the advisory groups and steering groups. Obviously, we want search needs to be open and free for everybody, including the indexing of any other third-party services out there. Access and use of open data will always be free and open for everyone. There's a process for requesting data. So it's one of the requirements that came out of both MEDA and the EDVP programs, was how can people ask for data? So a process to do that, and obviously the tools, code, and what have you. That's in the free bucket. There's a question there around what should be involved in paid membership. So, for example, authenticated publishing, authenticated usage. As soon as we're getting into the sort of commercial data sharing piece here, that's a natural boundary condition. One thing we're not sure about right now is the participation in advisory groups, whether or not that should be paid or whether it could be waived in certain instances and so on. And certainly for the next quarter, looking at how we get more organizations just registered into the trust framework. And you've seen from the demo there that the process of that can be straightforward, but you do need some technical knowledge on that. And we're hoping to get that process down to a few hours over the coming months. Again, part of the output from the membership group in MEDA Phase 3 was different pricing tiers, looking at regulated entities, enterprise, SME, micro businesses, and non-profits. The non-profits there could be other trade associations or local authorities. And again, what we're looking for at this stage is indication of a commitment to join. There's a lot of work obviously to be done. MEDA Phase 3 got us to something that can be tested in the market. Now we have the fun job of seeing if that's actually what people want to do, because research programs can often give you everybody's intent, but they're not necessarily budget owners. So we now need to kind of take this and hold its feet to the fire with engagement and input directly from the market itself. Again, in terms of the roadmap here, over the coming months, over the rest of this year, it's really to get more data onboarded into the search system. And we know that there's a number of different data initiatives and portals out there. We want to make sure that they're all indexed so that we can have a cohesive entry point to the market and work through some more of those use cases. And there's certain use cases here that will be highly valuable, I think, to explore. For example, looking at flex markets or smart meter data and so on. But they're for the advisory groups to determine and for industry to help us all prioritize what should be done first. So again, a call to action here, please join the advisory groups or steering groups or review tracks here and share this with your colleagues and others who may be interested. Please let us know what you're working on so that we can get the metadata indexed within the Open Energy search function, and get in touch with us around registering into the trust framework. If you've got any further questions, please just email us at openenergy@icebreaker1.org. Thank you all for joining today, and we will publish the archive of this video online in the coming days. Thank you very much, everyone.